Sitting at 30 takes you downtown for the weekly luncheon meeting of the City Club of Portland. Live weekly coverage of City Club is made possible in part by TCI and is produced through the facilities of Portland Cable Access. Now we join the City Club for this week's program.
Welcome to the City Club of Portland. I'm Pete Heuser, your president. This is also the first congressional debate, and we've got our two candidates who will participate later in the program. The debate portion of this program is co-sponsored by the League of Women Voters of Oregon and the Oregon Alliance for Better Campaigns. Now, first we're going to deal with a resolution on one of the ballot measures. Yes, thank you. Now, can people hear with the PA system? Are people hearing me? No. Well, let me test this for a moment. Are people hearing better now? Is it the background noise, or is it the PA system that's not working very well? PA system isn't working very well? Well, we could speak really loudly, or we could wait for a minute to let them adjust it. Why don't I wait for a moment? Is that helping you? Well, let's keep testing for a moment, and once it gets settled down, I hope somebody's adjusting things. Why don't you raise your hand in the back when you think we're okay? All right. I appreciate everyone's attention. Now we just need to get our media working okay. I see people at another moment. Molly, you can. Now, can people in the back hear me? Would you raise your hands if you cannot hear me? No, I didn't say that. Okay, it looks like we cannot hear in the back still. It's not really even in the front, huh? Yeah, we can hear an echo as well. Let's continue to test the system. Continuing to test to see if the system works all right. See, we can hear up here all right. Now, is the system working now? Raise your hand if you're in back and you can hear me. I see some hands, so I think we'll begin, and perhaps as we by the time we get into the debate format of the program, we'll have the system down. At any rate, we want to welcome you here today. We're going to have a full program, and that's why we're starting early. First, we're going to hear a resolution on ballot measure 2669, the one that would provide additional funding for the Oregon Convention Center. Second, we're going to hear our study committee's report on ballot measure 61, which is the one that provides mandatory sentences for property crimes. And finally, we'll have the debate between Molly Bordonaro and David Wu. Now, our corporate sponsors today are Weyerhaeuser Corporation, CH2M Hill, and the law firm of Lane, Powell, Spears, Lebersky. We're, of course, grateful for their support. Without their corporate support, we wouldn't be able to have these Friday programs. Now, on to the resolution. Now, the funding for the Oregon Convention Center was first dealt with in a ballot measure in 1986. The club at the time did a full study on that measure and made a full report with recommendations. The board felt that because this present ballot measure was so similar to the one in 1986, we did not form a committee, but rather we decided to handle it by resolution. Jay Formick, who is chair of the research board, will present a resolution. After he makes the resolution, we will have an opportunity to comment on the resolution and perhaps debate if you would like to. We've got two mics. The mic on my right is for, the mic on the left is against. So if you're for the resolution or for the ballot measure recommendation, then you'd go at the for mic, otherwise you'd go at the against mic. So let's listen to Jay Formick, who will present the resolution on this ballot measure.
The resolution I am presenting today concerns ballot measure 2669, expansion of the Oregon Convention Center. The resolution was printed in the bulletin dated September 25, has been available at City Club offices since its publication, and was distributed at the tables this morning. You'll find it on your table, one copy per table. Ballot measure 2669 authorizes general obligation bonds for $82.1 million to finance expansion of the Oregon Convention Center. The facility plan will add 350,000 square feet to the center. The bonds will be paid over 20 years. In 1986, the club's membership voted to support the ballot measure that funded the construction of the Oregon Convention Center in the first place. Expansion of the current facility is consistent with the City Club's endorsement of that original vision and purpose. And the original vision and purpose was to promote Oregon, the region, and the City of Portland, and cultivate long-term economic gains for the larger community by attracting future development. I move acceptance of this resolution.
Thank you, Jay. Now, do we have any comments or debate on the resolution? All right, are you ready for the question? Okay, all those in favor of the resolution, City Club members in the audience who have voting cards, if you're in favor of the resolution, that is a vote yes on the ballot measure 2669. Thank you. If you're opposed to the resolution and therefore opposed to the ballot measure 2669, please raise your cards now. All right, thank you. It appears that the for votes have it, so this position of the club, that is to vote for 2669, will now go to the Board of Governors for final action. Now we move to the part of the program where the study committee will present its report on ballot measure 61, the mandatory sentencing for property crimes. As you know, our study committees are formed by City Club volunteers. Before the committee is formed, they're screened for conflict of interest to make sure they have no interest in the outcome. And the committee then studies the information, interviews experts on various sides of a ballot measure, and then they draft their report. But before the report is presented to you, the club, it is first reviewed by the research board and by the Board of Governors. Michael Campbell, who is an attorney with the Stowe-Reeves law firm, has served as chair, and he will present the report to us. The committee was unanimous in its recommendation. There was no minority recommendation, and so we don't have to go through the two-vote routine that we had to follow last week. I think everybody will be grateful for that. After Michael's presentation, we will then open up the meeting for debate and comment, and then after that we'll have the vote. Charlie Davis, who is a City Club past president, will serve as parliamentarian for the debate today. Now, you probably heard that on Wednesday, the Oregon Supreme Court ruled that there were not enough signatures in order to place this measure on the ballot and have it voted on. We don't now know what the position is going to be and whether we are going to be able to vote on it, but we wanted to be able to take a position so that the club can be heard. It's very likely there will be a ballot measure like this in the future if we don't vote on it this time, and we wanted to be able to let the legislature know that the club has studied this position and that the club has taken a position on it. So that's why we're going ahead with the debate and vote today. Now I'll turn the podium over to Michael Campbell. He will present a summary of the report and the recommendation.
Thanks, Peter. I'd first like to introduce and thank my fellow committee members for their very hard work on what is an extremely complicated and emotional issue. They are Tammy Chartraw, Greg and Trish Holden. And I'd also like to thank our research advisor, Jim Westwood, and Paul Leisner, the club's research director, for their invaluable and thoughtful assistance on this report. Having said that, I should probably explain why I shouldn't just sit down, given the Supreme Court's action. There is a theoretical possibility that this measure will still be on the ballot. Actually, there's a very good possibility the measure will be on the ballot. The question is whether the votes will be counted. The state, we understand, will file for reconsideration of the Supreme Court's decision on Monday. No one gives that much chance of success. In fact, most people think that the state is trying to buy time to figure out what they're going to do. Secondly, it's theoretically possible that the Secretary of State might change his position and try somehow to verify each individual signature. But again, that seems likely would not result in a different result anyway. The reasons that Peter suggested, though, I think it's important that we take action on this. The club, which is the precursor to this measure, and that has obviously had, whether you were for that or against that, that's had some very strong effects on the state. Let me explain just briefly what Measure 61 would do and why the committee unanimously is recommending that the club take a position against it. It does two things. It creates a mandatory 1 to 3 year additional sentence for a wide variety of crimes defined as major crimes under the measure. These are mandatory sentences. They cannot be varied by the judge. There is no credit for good behavior, and they are on top of whatever would be the existing sentence under the existing state law provisions. So that would apply to Measure 11 as well. If you have a 10-year Measure 11 mandatory sentence, you'd get an additional 1 to 3 years if you're a repeat offender. Secondly, it establishes a 14-month presumptive sentence, which can be modified by the judge depending on the circumstances of the crime and the individual offender. But that applies again only if the existing presumptive sentence is not already 14 months or more. So those are the two things it does. And again, it applies to virtually all felony offenses, but not quite all. So it's a very broad measure. It was promoted as being a property crimes measure, but in fact it applies to a wide variety of what are called person crimes, such as robbery, rape, manslaughter. Let me just give you quickly essentially 4 reasons why the committee is recommending a no vote. First, this measure was promoted as a deterrent to crime. For the reasons stated in our report, we found that although there's likely to be some small effect on crime rates, there's not likely to be a very significant effect. And the simple reason for that is that the measure is likely to work only on those people who are incarcerated while they're actually incarcerated. It will have very little deterrent effect. There is not historically a very strong correlation in Oregon between incarceration rates and crime rates. Secondly, the measure, I think the proponents of this measure would tell you, even if it doesn't affect crime rates, it's a matter of justice, that these crimes are so serious and the existing sentences are so trivial in their view that justice just cannot abide these sort of sentences. We don't think that's a very credible reason either. For one thing, this measure applies uniformly to all sorts of crimes. You get an additional enhancement for repeat offenses, whether you're a car thief or a rapist or you've been convicted of manslaughter. It's the exact same enhancement. Secondly, there's no ability by the judge to adjust the crime or the sentence to fit the crime or the individual defendant. That's a problem that has been created with Measure 11, and it's resulted in some very strong skewing of the criminal justice system, where you have people being convicted of crimes they didn't really commit because the prosecutor couldn't, in good conscience, convict them or charge them with a crime that would result in a Measure 11 sentence. Third, and probably the strongest reason, given these concerns about whether it really will have much effect on crime rates and whether it really does promote justice, the measure will be enormously expensive. The state estimates that it will cost over $1 billion over the next decade just for Measure 61. The proponents strongly dispute that, but even they can see that it will be something like half that, i.e. several $100 million. There's been no process to decide whether this money would be better spent on more police, better spent on schools, better spent or left in the pockets of taxpayers. The public doesn't get a chance to vote on that. You vote for Measure 61, and the state has to pay the consequences. Finally, the state does have what the committee has called in this report a rational system as opposed to the irrational system of Measure 61, a rational system for setting sentences. There is an existing sentencing guidelines system which allows judges to take into consideration the seriousness of the crime, the criminal history of the offender. The guidelines are set based on some notion of what resources the state is willing and able to commit to incarceration. And finally, the judge can vary the guideline sentence based on, again, the individual crime and the individual defendant. Measure 61 doesn't allow that. It's a flat, mandatory sentence that the judge has no control over. The state has no control over the funds committed to it. This measure was in fact presented in very similar form to the Oregon legislature, which is not noted for its liberal tendencies on criminal matters, and it was not passed. So for all these reasons, the committee has recommended a no vote on Measure 61, and as Peter has mentioned, we're very likely to see this thing again in the future. So I would move that where are my words, Peter? Move the adoption of the report and recommendation. Thank you.
Stay there. Thank you, Michael. Now we get a chance to comment on or ask questions or debate the position of the report. The mic on the right is for, that is people who are speaking for the recommendation or against the ballot measure. The mic on my left is against the recommendation or for passage of the ballot measure. Do we have any comments or question? Well, we're ready for the question. All right, let's take a vote. All of those City Club members in the audience who are in favor of the recommendation of the report, that is to vote no on ballot measure 61, please raise your cards now. Thank you. All of those opposed to the recommendation or who vote yes on the ballot measure, raise your cards now. All right, well, it looks like the fours have it, so it is now the club position that a no vote is recommended on ballot measure 61. Thank you, Michael, for your work on and that for the work of your committee. Now on to the debate for the first congressional seat. Now I see David Wu is here. I know that Molly Bordonaro was on her way up. The district itself is an interesting one. It extends all the way from the Portland West Hills to the coast, while it's registered pretty evenly between Democrats and Republicans. There are so many independents in the district that they oftentimes decide District 1 elections. Now, for its first 80 years, the district voted Republican. It had a Republican representative in Congress. But for the past 24, we've seen Democrats represent the first. Until 1993, the district was represented by men, but now it's female. We'll soon find out whether it'll stay that way. Our candidates are very interesting as well. One wants us to remember that she's a fifth-generation Oregonian, while the other's campaign is based upon a recent immigrant realizing the American dream. He went to private school at Stanford and the Ivy League, while she graduated from the University of Colorado, one of our finest public schools. One candidate has been able to rely upon the support of the high-tech companies he's been helping for years, while the other has never really worked in corporate America, but she's been able to rally corporate support to an extent greater than people thought she would. But Molly Bordonaro and David Wu also have a lot in common. They're both bright, ambitious young professionals, both convincingly won their primaries against politicians that at least initially were better known. Both are running for Congress without ever having held public office. Now they think that is an advantage, but do we? This debate will show us how well they've been able to come up to speed on the issues without being a part of the process. Now, the debate format that we'll have is just as it has been for the past few weeks. First, each candidate will have a 3-minute opening statement, and the order has been chosen early in the month in a drawing of straws. The order for the closing arguments has also been previously chosen. Now, following the opening statements, the candidates will respond to questions from our panel. Our questioners today are Marge Kafori of the City Club, Adele Newton, president of the Washington County Chamber of the League of Women Voters, will also be asking questions. Now, the questions were submitted in advance by the members of the City Club and the League. There will be no other questions asked, no questions from the floor, and the candidates have not yet seen any of these questions. Our timer today is Trudy Robinson. Trudy is a member of the Portland Chamber of the League of Women Voters. Now, following the panel question, each candidate will have an opportunity to ask 2 cross questions of the other. Following the rotation of those questions, each candidate then will make a 3-minute closing statement. Now, please hold your applause till the end of the program. I'd now like to ask the candidates to approach their podiums, and we'll begin with an opening statement by David Wu, followed by Molly Bordonaro.
Well, it's been very, very good to have been a member of this club for the past 16 years. And there have been, as you know, many occasions when I've sat in your seats preparing for that one tough question, that one unanswerable question perhaps. And now as I stand up here and I hear those long knives being sharpened, I know that there is a just God. But we face important issues in this election, and I'd like to let you know that I am running for Congress because I know in my heart that public service can make a profound difference in people's lives. My parents made deep sacrifices so that our family could come to America. Without those sacrifices and without access to decent public education, I would not be standing before you today. I am running because I want to bring those educational opportunities and opportunity in general to a wider range of Americans. This election presents an important choice for Oregonians because my opponent and I differ on crucial issues. Issues like improving public education. I have fought for public education all of my life. I have lived that experience. My opponent supports putting public dollars toward private schools. I support fighting crime and guns through the assault weapons ban. My opponent does not. I would fight to put all of our budget surplus towards Social Security and preserve it for future generations. My opponent has other plans. I would protect a woman's right to choose. My opponent's stand is otherwise. I look forward to a positive, substantive, and straight discussion of the issues, these issues of great importance to our future. Thank you.
It's a pleasure to be here this afternoon. Before I get started today, I want to take an opportunity to recognize two very important women in my life, my mom and my grandmother, who turns 91 next month and are here with me today. Now, David, before you think about getting too nasty today, please remember that my grandmother is in the audience. But seriously, standing before you today recalls to my memory a conversation that my mother and grandmother and I had when I first decided to run for office. We were sitting around talking, and we realized how far we had come, how far all women had come. When my mother was my age, it was basically unheard of for a young woman to seek public office. And when my grandmother was young, women had just earned the right to vote. And so I pay tribute to you today. I'm running for Congress because I spent 5 years in Washington, D.C., where I saw firsthand members of Congress make decisions weighed more heavily not on what was good for the people or good for this country, but many times instead on partisan battles, own re-election campaigns, and personal gains. And that's why I'm seeking office, so that we can return to bipartisan, common-sense solutions to work together to open up the doors to improve a better future for the next generation. And I believe that we can do that by improving our public schools, not by keeping money in Washington, D.C. and spending it on bureaucracy and administrative cost, but instead by returning it directly back to our local schools here in Portland and Beaverton, and spending it on our kids in the classroom, and empowering our local school boards and teachers and administrators to make our public schools in Oregon the best that they can be. And that we make sure that our streets and neighborhoods and communities are safe and free from crime, with stiffer penalties, longer sentences, and good prevention. And by keeping gun violence down with an instant background check and holding parents responsible for easy access to guns in the home. And that we restore our economic future to its capable potential by ensuring that we restore fiscal responsibility by balancing the federal budget and using the surplus funds to first protect and replenish the Social Security Trust Fund. And then, after that, use the money to provide meaningful tax relief for working families. This is my vision for a better future, and I look forward to working with you on these issues and discussing all of my issues today. Thank you.
Nice, polite applause for each of our candidates. Now let's hold the rest of it until the end of the debate. Thank you very much. Now we'll turn the program over to our panelists, Marge Kafori and Adele Newton. They'll ask questions. The candidates will have 90 seconds to answer, and then the opposing candidate will have 60 seconds to rebut. Now, the first question will be asked by Marge Kafori of David Wu.
Thank you, Peter. Mr. Wu. As Oregonians, we pride ourselves on being special and our state as being unique. What specific Oregon values do you believe Congress should enact as national laws?
To me, the most special value of Oregon is something which cannot be enacted into any law. We have a very, very special sense of community here, and it is essentially a private sector and a community value. That is not something which Congress can legislate. That having been said, I think most people talk about Oregon's natural beauty before they talk about our strong sense of community. For me, it's just the other way around. There are a lot of things that the federal government can do to protect our clean air, our clean water, and our open spaces. But that, for me, is our natural beauty is second to our sense of community here in Oregon.
Well, I believe that here in Oregon, we do have a wonderful environment, and as a member of Congress, I'm going to work to make sure that we do have clean air and clean water, and make sure that we protect the wonderful heritage of the natural resources and natural resource industries in this state. I also believe that Oregon is a leader in the nation on cutting-edge ideas. We were the leader on welfare reform. We've been the leader with health care reform with the Oregon Health Plan. We've been the leader on improving public schools. And because Oregon is a pioneer state, as your Congresswoman, I am not going to go back with more mandates on Oregon, with more bureaucracy and more spending, but instead empower Oregon, move the decisions back here at the state level and the community level so that we can continue to allow Oregon to flourish, to grow, to make it the best place to live and to work and to raise a family, and to ensure that we continue to be the pioneers in terms of innovative policy solutions in this country.
Okay, we have a question of Ms. Bordonaro, please.
You are conducting a campaign which has required you to raise an enormous sum of money to conduct your election race. Given your experience, how should elections be financed? And specifically, what campaign finance reforms will you support?
Well, I'm proud in this race to have the majority of my support come from individuals, and the majority of the individual support come from here within the state of Oregon. I want to make sure that we protect that ability for individuals to contribute. I do support campaign finance reform, and two measures in particular: limiting soft money to parties in particular, and two, moving towards fuller disclosure so that you, the people, are empowered to be able to police candidates, to be able to see who is contributing and how the candidates are spending their money. And in fact, I believe so strongly in moving towards fuller disclosure that in this race, I opened up my campaign books 2 weeks earlier before the deadline because we were not asked to release our campaign finances until after the absentee ballots were mailed. And because I thought that was wrong, I opened up my books earlier and I challenged my opponent to do the same, and unfortunately he did not.
I would support both the Shays-Meehan legislation before the House and the McCain-Feingold bill before the Senate. Both would limit soft money contributions and independent expenditures. I think these are important. I'd like to say that we are working very, very hard to make full and fair disclosure of all of our individual contributors. And I am very proud of all the support we have across the Congressional District, across Oregon, and across the country. I'm very proud of our organizational support from Oregon's 35,000 teachers because of my strong stance on education. I am very proud of our support from the Sierra Club and the League of Conservation Voters because of our support of the environment. I hope that my opponent is equally proud of her support from the National Rifle Association, which would fight the assault weapons ban, and the National Right to Life Association, which would terminate a woman's right to choose.
Question of Mr. Wu.
Mr. Wu, since neither you nor your opponent has held public office and has no voting record to examine, on what basis should we judge how you would perform as a member of Congress?
I believe that having lived the life of the community is an important judge, an important indicator of how we should be judged. I have been participating in the life of our community for the last 16 years. In our firm, we helped many businesses start, and I'd like to think that we helped build the new economy in this corner of Oregon, and I'd like to think that I would be an effective spokesperson for the new economy from Oregon to Washington, D.C., especially in high technology and in international trade. In terms of living the life of the community, I have served on the Portland Planning Commission. I have helped start several educational support organizations, and I have done other things that where I have taken a leadership role and a long-term role in organizations, which I think indicate how I would serve as a member of Congress.
Certainly, having run my own business, worked in Washington, D.C., and been a volunteer in the community with things like my husband and I volunteering at St. Mary's Home for the Boys, are wonderful indicators of my commitment to Oregon and my commitment and desire to serve. But I think more than anything else, How someone is going to conduct themselves in office is very reflective of how they conduct themselves over the course of their campaign. After all, campaigns are probably the closest intersection the voters and candidates have in the discussion of public policy. And that is why I have consistently run a positive campaign in all of my elections. And unfortunately, David, you have not and are continuing to run campaigns based on misleading and negative attacks. And that is why the Oregonian called your campaign misleading and negative.
Question of Ms. Bordonaro.
If you were to host a dinner party with 3 of the world's most influential persons, whom would you invite? And what would you like to ask each of your guests?
Well, if I could host a dinner party with 3 of the most influential people, first I'd have to ask my husband, Matt. And once he said okay, I would probably, at this point in time, invite Benjamin Netanyahu, Yasser Arafat, so that we could sit down and break bread together and discuss why we can't reach peace in the Middle East. And then I would want to make sure that we bring forward somebody like Elizabeth Dole, who is working as a figure in this country to provide wonderful relief as a leader in American Red Cross, but also as a wonderful leader for women and women in public office.
Mr. Wu?
3 individuals to have over for dinner. I think I would invite Nelson Mandela and Václav Havel, both of whom have been outspoken and outstanding advocates for democracy and who have served time in prison for their efforts. I would also, as a third, invite Thomas Jefferson. The story goes that the most brilliance collected in one room in the White House was when Thomas Jefferson dined alone there 200 years ago. In response to what my opponent has mentioned earlier, I would in discussing this campaign, this is a mail piece that says character and integrity don't count. And it names me specifically, and it tells lies about me. And I would ask my opponent to specifically disavow this mail piece today.
Absolutely.
Excuse me. You will get a chance. Now we have a question of Mr. Wu.
Thank you. Mr. Wu, this nation has been debating the issue of abortion for 25 years or more. If you were the one person able to bring closure to this issue, how would you do it?
I was pro-choice before this election. I am pro-choice today. And I will be pro-choice as your representative in Congress. I simply do not believe that the federal government has a role in our most private decisions, and letting people make their own choices is the road to the future. I am the only candidate that you can count on to protect a woman's right to choose in the future.
Let me address this issue. I am pro-life. It's a matter that is personal to me and is a matter of conscience. And I understand that many of you in this room may not agree with my personal position. But let me tell you how I'm going to approach this as a member of Congress. I don't have a single issue litmus test for this issue or for any other. I don't support a constitutional amendment banning all abortions. Instead, I am going to be a voice to bring people together on this issue, to work to reduce abortions in this country. And I think that's something that everyone in this room can agree on, and that is going to be my pledge to you. And David, it is my hope that over the course of this campaign, you do not use this very sensitive issue to continue to divide people and divide Oregonians. You respect my personal beliefs, and you work to bring people together to reduce abortions and bring healing to this issue.
Question of Ms. Bordonaro.
Crime prevention and control are on the minds of many Americans. What specific crime prevention strategies would you support?
Well, I believe that we need to be very firm and tough on violent criminals in our neighborhoods and communities, and that's why I support truth in sentencing, which forces violent criminals to serve their full term, firm punishment for violent juveniles, making sure that we have stiffer penalties for drug dealers. We have strong prevention programs for our kids. That's why Matt and I are volunteer mentors at St. Mary's Home for the Boys. And when it comes to these issues, I'm the only candidate has stood up in support of them. I also support reducing gun violence. We have an assault weapon ban in this country, but we still have gun violence. And that's why I support an instant background check for violent felons so they can't purchase firearms. That we make sure that we have a zero tolerance policy at our schools for guns, and that we hold parents responsible for easy access to firearms in the home. These are the solutions that are going to curb violence, crime, and drug violence in our neighborhoods and communities, and that is why the Oregon Association of Sheriffs and Police Chiefs throughout this community are standing with me and have endorsed my candidacy. And I'd like to know, David, why you refuse to support these type of good common sense ideas on firm punishment.
Well, the truth is that I actually do support those measures. Those were left blank, I believe, in a questionnaire, and it is inaccurate to characterize that as a no answer. I actually believe in a three-part program about crime. I mean, we always focus on incarceration, but quite frankly, we have built so many prison beds in the state of Oregon, and we have not sufficiently emphasized the other two components, which is education and prevention. If we do a good job of education, then hopefully most young people will have a chance to go on to something positive. And for others, we need prevention. And when prevention fails, there's incarceration. There's another problem in this country, and that's the problem of gun violence. 5,285 children were killed by guns in 1996. One child is too many, and because of my strong stance on responsible gun ownership, that's why I have the endorsement of people like Josh Markey and Sarah Brady. Thank you.
Question of Mr. Wu.
Thank you. Mr. Wu, proponents of takings legislation believe that individuals should be compensated when the value of their land is reduced because of a government regulation. For example, you own land which includes an estuary which the government would like to protect. Do you support such legislation? And what should happen if a government regulation increases the value of land?
I do support compensation when it is warranted under the full circumstances that you consider. If it's a complete taking, we shouldn't let it litigate through the courts for 5, 10, or 15 years. We should be upfront about it and appropriate the funds necessary to compensate the landowner. However, it's been settled law in America for 50 or 100 years that you can't do just anything you want with a private piece of property. You can't put a rendering plant next to a housing development. And it's a complicated area where the connection to the public purpose is the determinant of whether there should be compensation or not, and also how complete the taking is. When there is a complete taking and not sufficient connection to a public purpose, we should appropriate the funds and compensate the landowner.
Well, I believe that there are many times when we need to come together as a community to protect our environment. And we make these decisions at the local and the state and the federal level to make sure that we do have cleaner air and cleaner water and a beautiful environment. But when in the course of that public policy discussion, it enters into the impacting someone's own personal property for the benefit of the community, I believe that the community should share that burden by compensating the private property owner. One, because it's the fair thing to do, and two, because private property rights are the cornerstone of what this country was founded upon, and I want to make sure to protect that for future generations.
Question of Ms. Bordonaro.
Many observers believe that the U.S. economy is slowing, and many other nations' economies are in deep trouble. If you were in Congress today, would you support a substantial tax cut, or would you do something else with this year's surplus?
Well, let me say that I believe that we need to balance our federal budget, and I actually support a balanced budget amendment to the Constitution so that we can permanently require the federal government to balance its budget, something that I know David does not support. We are looking at the potential of $1.5 trillion surpluses right now over the next 10 years. And I am going to be a strong voice in Congress to make sure that we use that money to protect and replenish the Social Security Trust Fund first. That is the most sacred promise that we have made to the American people, and I want to make sure that Social Security is not just available for my grandmother, but for me and for my children as well. And once we've protected Social Security, I do look at I do support beginning to pay down the debt and giving middle class and working families a tax break. Once we've protected the Social Security Trust Fund, I think it's okay to give working families who are struggling and middle-class families a tax break. And this is something that David doesn't support, not now, not in 5 years, not in 10 years, not in 20 years. And I think that's the wrong fiscal policy for this country. And I believe that if we do these things and continue to expand free trade and refund IMF, we're going to continue to grow this economy in this country to an unprecedented rate. And that's why our high-tech community like Intel and Tektronix have endorsed my candidacy.
Let me make something perfectly clear. I'm a deficit hawk. For God's sakes, you're looking at a man who still owns a 1965 Ford Falcon. I believe in a balanced budget. I just don't believe in enshrining it in the Constitution where during times of war or during times of depression, we're in a straitjacket. With respect to the international economy and our current situation, which I believe was the original focus of the question, I would strongly, strongly urge funding of the International Monetary Fund where we can help other economies at an early stage. That funding was held up because of what? Because of choice issues unconnected to the economy. I fully support assistance to these international organizations, and it might have helped out those economies early enough so that we don't see the layoffs that we're seeing in Oregon today. As a final note, investment in education and research is the way to grow the economy in the long term.
Question of Mr. Wu.
Mr. Wu, Congress has considered, but apparently will not act this year on legislation which would have the effect of overriding Oregon's assisted suicide law. What will your position be on such legislation when it resurfaces next year?
I very strongly believe that there is an important zone of privacy around each and one of us that includes the right to choose with respect to reproductive decisions, and that includes the right to choose how we exit this world. I intend to strongly defend Oregon's right to make its own legislation in assisted suicide.
I'll be honest with you. I did not support Oregon's physician-assisted suicide law here in the state. I believe that the role of a physician is to heal, but Oregon voters have made their choice. And because, as your Congresswoman, I believe in making decisions at the state and the local level, I am not going to vote to override Oregon's law.
Question of Ms. Bordonaro.
Assume that you are a member of the House Judiciary Committee. What, in your view, are the specific offenses committed by the president which qualify him for impeachment?
Well, first of all, let me just say that when I originally kicked off my campaign, and probably when David did as well, we had no idea that 3 weeks before the election we would ever get a question like this. But I believe that we need to move forward with this process. The questions of impeachable offenses have been brought forward to the Judiciary Committee, including perjury under oath, obstruction of justice, and I believe that this process needs to move forward, and I would support that. But I hope that this issue is resolved before I am elected to Congress. And if for some reason it is not, as I go back there, I am going to take one message from Oregon. and that is, let's get this issue over with and move on.
As someone who said last year, I'd like to serve on the House Judiciary Committee because I believe that it has jurisdiction over the new economy, patent trademark office, copyright office, intellectual property rights. This question hits a little close to home. And I think that all I should say at this point is I would take a measured, fair, and expeditious approach, because I think it is crucially important to get this matter behind us so that we can get on with the business of the nation, with building a good public education system, with saving Social Security, with addressing international issues of war and peace and economic development abroad, and whether our economy is going to be healthy at home. It's time to get on with the business of the people of America.
Question of Mr. Wu.
Mr. Wu, most Americans rely on Social Security as a fundamental part of their retirement income. What is your plan for ensuring the continued stability of the Social Security system? And in your answer, please address the pros and cons of investing Social Security funds in the stock market.
It would have been a great idea in July, but a terrible idea. A terrible idea I'm against that. I think that we need to bring a bipartisan approach to solving Social Security. Longtime backers of Social Security, such as Senator Moynihan, have put forth thoughtful proposals on reforming Social Security. I have to add that I have spoken about the importance of education and research and growing the economy in helping our Social Security system. And not very many people believed me when I talked about that a year ago. And then in April, a study came out which indicated that because of continued economic growth, we actually do have 3 more years of life on the Social Security Trust Fund. I do not advocate proposals such as my opponent has in raising the retirement age beyond age 67 or in privatizing the Social Security system. I think that that idea sounded good a few months ago, and as history has shown us, it is not a good idea today.
Well, we have very immediate concerns with our Social Security system right now, and as your Congresswoman, I'm going to fight to make sure that we use the budget surpluses to first protect and replenish the Social Security Trust Fund, and then after that, work in a bipartisan manner to look at new ideas to make sure that we modernize the Social Security system and make it solvent for future generations. I'm open to ideas. I'm open to the idea that President Clinton has talked about, and Senator Moynihan and Senator Kerry, 2 leading Democrats in the Senate, not of privatizing the Social Security system, but of allowing individuals to put a percentage of their payroll tax into some type of secure account so that they have more responsibility and are able to allow their money to grow into a more secure retirement. The one thing I do want to say about this very important issue is that I think it is distasteful and wrong to use such a serious issue as a political wedge over the course of a campaign, and I hope that we do not see this issue become a campaign issue, because as we continue to do every time, we are further and further away from coming up with a bipartisan solution.
Now we have a question of Ms. Bordonaro. I think we will have 2 extra questions after this one.
You both support health care access for all Americans. What specific legislative changes would you support to extend health care coverage to all?
Well, first of all, I support making sure that Oregon can continue to get the federal waivers necessary for the Oregon Health Plan, because here in Oregon that has been essential to provide health care for those who are needy and indigent. In Oregon, because we've had such a great Oregon Health Plan, the largest percentage of the uninsured now are those who are self-employed or work for sole proprietorships. because self-employed individuals are not allowed to purchase health insurance with pre-tax dollars like the current employers are able to do. And that's why I allow Congress extending the ability for the self-employed to purchase health insurance with pre-tax dollars. I also support protecting the quality of our healthcare system by ensuring to protect the patient-physician relationship with managed care. Ideas like a patient's Bill of Rights, which would allow a woman to see an OBGYN or a child to see a pediatrician as their first choice of doctor, to be able to go to emergency room without a prior approval, and to make sure that if you need to see some type of specialist, that you are able to go to a peer review board of doctors to immediately get care. These are the ideas in strengthening Medicare as well that are going to continue to make health insurance available for all Americans.
In answer to the prior question, my opponent, I believe, agrees with me that there is nothing more important than Social Security. And true differences in policy should be aired, and that's not partisan, that's a necessary part of our political and electoral process. With respect to the current question, I think that, in my experience as a small business owner, we were not able to deduct our healthcare costs, and making those healthcare costs fully deductible would be one first step to expand access. A second step would be to encourage smaller businesses to band together into buying groups so that they can enjoy the lower costs that larger organizations have. I fully support a truly meaningful patient Bill of Rights that would also improve the kind of health care to which we have access. And that means being able to go to the first available emergency room. That means being able to continue care with the same physician.
A question of Mr. Wu.
Mr. Wu, both of you have made education a central focus in this race. One of you favors federal funding to hire more teachers, while the other favors federal grants to states and local schools. Why is your approach superior to that of your opponent?
I strongly believe in full funding of Head Start, in putting 100,000 additional qualified teachers into the classroom in grades K through 3, where they can do the most good and where all the studies show that the gains are permanent through a student's life. I also support funding, better funding for college financial aid, because 80% of college financial aid is federal in origin. Those are specific programmatic ideas, but they are fiscally responsible because I believe in funding them through a balanced budget. They are better than the block grant approach, which my opponent has espoused. I accept her sincere views. However, the block grant approach is nothing more and nothing less than a cynical two-step process for cutting federal support for public education. First, you remove support from specific programs where mothers and fathers will come forward and defend those programs. You block grant the money out where it's amorphous, and then you cut the block grants within a couple of years. In a conversation with an educator, those are her exact comments. It'll be okay for the first couple of years, but the cuts will come in years 3 or 4 or 5. It's a cynical two-step cut process.
Well, David, I think once again this is why the Oregonian called your campaign misleading and negative, because that is simply what I am not talking about. What I am talking about is trusting all of you in this room, trusting our parents, trusting our teachers, empowering our local school districts, not cutting a single dollar for education from our federal budget, but spending it in the classroom to help our kids, not spending it on bureaucracies. And I just want to read something that Bob Shook, the chairman of the Beaverton School Board, who happens to be a Democrat, said about both of our positions in the Oregonian. Quote, "I like Molly's approach to local control, which is really the issue. Wu's approach is to throw teachers at school districts, which is a pretty simplistic approach. Different districts require different kinds of solutions. I don't want Washington dictating how to solve problems for Beaverton or Portland, and that is why school boards across this district have endorsed my candidacy."
And we have the final question from the panel of Ms. Bordonaro.
In the past 15 years, government agencies have spent more than $3 billion in an attempt to save certain species of salmon in the Northwest. Given that there are a vast number of competing needs for our limited resources, why should we continue to spend money on saving the salmon?
Well, I do believe that saving the salmon should be a priority here in Oregon, but I do believe that it needs to be done at the state and the local level. I'm opposed to the federal government stepping in with regulations and mandates dictating how we should do it here in Oregon, and that's why I support Governor Kitzhaber's plan to save our salmon, which works with the private sector, which works with individuals throughout this community to restore our salmon runs watershed by watershed. I also believe that we need to continue with Governor Kitzhaber's plan as the genesis for solid salmon recovery and use it to bring all groups together throughout Oregon and throughout this community, those who use the waterway system, those who are fishing and timber and in other agricultural industries, and make sure that we come up with decisions here in Oregon that are going to help Oregonians maintain a strong economy, protect jobs, and save our salmon as well.
I believe we must continue to try to save all the salmon species we can, because first and foremost, the salmon is a signature species for the Northwest. It's a cultural icon for us. And secondly, salmon are an indicator species. They're like the canary in the coal mine. What they really indicate to us is that we have a water quality problem, and we need to work hard to improve water quality, to improve the way that we handle timber practices and cattle practices and the way we manage our waterways. We need to bring all the stakeholders together and work hard on common sense, consensus solutions. I support the Kitzhaber Coastal Coho Salmon Recovery Plan, and I have received his endorsement in part because of my campaign's environmental stands.
Now each of the candidates has an opportunity to ask 2 questions of the other. The questions must be asked in 30 seconds. The response is given 60 seconds, after which time the questioning candidate has a chance for a 30-second rebuttal. We'll alternate between the candidates, and we'll begin with Mr. Wu asking a question of Ms. Bordonaro.
Molly, in the past, you supported a constitutional ban on all abortions, but recently you changed your position. Now you say you want to bring healing to this issue. Does that mean you would now vote for legislation like the Freedom of Choice Act to stop the erosion of a woman's right to choose?
David, I've been very clear on this issue over the course of this campaign, and what's worse is that you know it. I have been very upfront, as I was earlier in this program, about the fact that I am pro-life. It's a personal issue for me, and it's a matter of conscience. But what's important for all of you in this room to know is how I would approach this issue as a member of Congress. And I've been very upfront about saying that I do not have a single issue litmus test for this issue or for any other issue, and that I don't support a constitutional amendment banning all abortions. David, I'm the only one in this race who is trying to truly bring both people who are pro-choice and pro-life to focus on ways that we can reduce abortions by supporting streamlining the adoption process and by eliminating extreme abortion practices like partial birth. And David, I am not using this issue in this campaign. You are the one who is using this personal and sensitive issue to divide Oregonians.
I think it's critically important to stand firm for one's values. I was pro-choice before this election. I am pro-choice now. And as your representative in Congress, I will be pro-choice. Government simply has no role in our most personal decisions. I am the only candidate in this race that you can count on to protect a woman's right to choose.
Ms. Bordonaro's question to Mr. Wu.
David, you're on record opposing the federal transportation bill approved by Congress and the President this year, a bill that included several important transportation projects for this region. But 3 projects in the bill you opposed are now appearing in your TV ad: light rail mass transit, the Columbia Gorge Scenic Highway, and the highway improvements in Washington County. Is this a change of position, or if not, how do you explain these inconsistencies to the voters?
These are not inconsistencies and these are not changes. What I was careful to point out is that there was $9 billion in the legislation called T21, which are demonstration projects, which do not move people from one place to another. And I gave T21 as an example of where you can cut some fat out of the federal budget, just as you can cut some fat out of the defense budget, because every year we appropriate more money than the Defense Department asks for, and those defense projects go to congressional districts primarily in the form of pork. Back to T21 and the transportation bill, yes, I would have supported a transportation bill, but a slimmer, trimmer, and more fiscally responsible transportation bill.
Well, you sound as if you're trying to change your position. You were very clear in the Oregonian earlier that you opposed the current transportation bill. I would have supported it because it's not a partisan issue. It's about good leadership for Oregon and for this region. The federal transportation funds are appropriated, and then after that, they are decided whether or not they're going to come here to Oregon or they're going to go to another state. And the reason support for this bill was sound for 3 reasons. 1, because it improves the quality of life in an area that is fast growing. It ensures that we finally, for the first time in many years, get back our fair share of Oregon's dollars. And second and last, it's about good leadership, about being involved in the process. A no vote would have clearly taken you out of the debate, and the money would have gone to California, New York, instead of Oregon.
Now we'll have Mr. Wu's question of Ms. Bordonaro.
I just wanted to hear the bell again. Molly, during the time that you supported a constitutional ban on all abortions, you also supported efforts in Congress to repeal the ban on military-style assault weapons. Would you still repeal this law and permit AK-47s and Uzis on our streets, or have you changed your position on this fundamental issue also?
David, we already have a ban on assault weapons in this country, and I'm not going back as a member of Congress to take away the rights of law-abiding citizens. I believe that we need people to stand up and make sure that we remove crime and drugs and gun violence from this community in a responsible way. And that's why I support truth in sentencing for violent criminals, firm punishment for violent juveniles, making sure that we stiffen penalties for drug dealers, get tough on gun violence with an instant background check for criminals, and hold parents responsible for easy access to guns. And that is why, David, in this race, sheriffs and police chiefs throughout this community who are in the line of fire every day and who are on the streets to make our community safer have overwhelmingly endorsed my candidacy.
This issue is one more example of the vast differences between my opponent and me. My opponent has a strong support of the NRA leadership. The NRA is counting on my opponent to help repeal the ban on assault weapons and open the floodgates to these weapons of war back on our streets. In contrast, I'm endorsed by Sarah Brady because I support reasonable laws to protect our children, make our streets safe, and keep guns out of the hands of criminals.
Now Ms. Bordonaro's question of Mr. Wu.
Let me just correct again first David's misleading statements. I will be an independent voice in Congress. But David, I want to ask you, why don't you support the following? Increased penalties for drug dealers, truth in sentencing laws for violent criminals so that they serve their full sentences, firm punishment for violent juveniles, and increasing funding for well-respected prevention programs for at-risk youth like the Boys and Girls Clubs.
I believe the answer to that is I do support those.
Well, let me read your own words from the Oregonian on October 4th. Quote, "I'm not going to give it to you now so they can pick at it one way or another." This was in reference to your position or lack thereof on drugs and crime, which you have refused to give repeatedly over this campaign, and I believe that that is an irresponsible approach that doesn't do justice to this debate or to the voters of this district. And that is why in this race, I'm the only one who has been upfront about making sure that we do have firm punishment for violent juveniles, and we are tough on violent felons, and that we do support truth in sentencing laws.
Now we will conclude with 3-minute closing statements of the two candidates. We'll begin with Molly Bordonaro, followed by David Wu.
It's been an honor to be here today. I want to say, as your Congresswoman, I'll keep an open mind to all ideas, and I'll work in a positive bipartisan manner to ensure that we focus on solutions to improve our public schools, to keep our streets and neighborhoods safe and free from drugs and crime, and to ensure that we continue to grow this economy by restoring fiscal responsibility to the federal government. I'm proud and honored in this race to have the endorsements of Senator Mark Hatfield and Governor Vic Atiyeh, two individuals that have consistently put Oregon and this country before partisan politics and negative attacks, and that's the type of leader that I'm going to be. I want to go back to Washington, D.C. as your Congresswoman to work to improve our public schools, not by supporting more bureaucracy and more spending in Washington, D.C., but by taking our federal education dollars and sending them directly back to our local schools, to spend them in the classroom on our kids, and to empower our local school districts. I'm going to make sure that we keep our streets and neighborhoods safe and free from crime, not by weaker laws that release violent felons early in our neighborhoods, but by firm punishment, longer sentences, and prevention programs. And I'm going to continue to grow this economy by restoring fiscal responsibility, by maintaining a federal balanced budget that protects Social Security, and then moves to give tax relief for working families. And I'm going to support growing jobs in Oregon by expanding free trade to open up new markets for Oregon products. My hope is that we can get together in a few years and we can say, we've made the right choices, we've done the right things, and as a result, our schools are the best in the world. Our streets are safe and free from crime, and this economy is continuing to grow at an unprecedented rate. And if you believe in this vision, then I'd love to have your support in this campaign and your vote. And I look forward to working with you to turn these dreams into reality. Thank you.
This is an important election. There have only been 4 holders of this congressional seat since World War II, and your decision is very, very important because there are vast differences between my opponent and me. I will fight for quality public education. My opponent is on record supporting vouchers, which take our money and put it into private schools, thereby depriving the public schools of the resources they need to maintain quality or to reduce class size. I support the assault weapons ban. My opponent would repeal it. I would put all of our potential budget surplus into Social Security. My opponent favors a risky plan which would benefit the few at the expense of our common retirement security. That plan would be funded dollar for dollar from the Social Security Trust Fund. And finally, I support a woman's right to choose. My opponent does not. These are important differences. They'll make a difference in our future. I want to see a future where all children have access to a good public education, to college education, which is affordable, to real job training if they're not going to college. A future where weapons of war will no longer stalk our streets. A future where all seniors are secure in their retirement regardless of means, where a woman has the right to choose and not have that right nibbled away. I ask for your support, I ask for your vote, but regardless of how you plan to vote, please vote on November 3, because when you vote, you redeem the past and the sacrifice of all those who have come before us. You make decisions for the present, and by making these decisions, you help shape our future. Thank you very much.
I want to thank both of our candidates for this enlightening debate. Well, we certainly have a choice, don't we? Join us next week at the Doubletree, the Lloyd Center Doubletree, formerly the Red Lion, to hear the gubernatorial debate between Governor Kitzhaber and Bill Sizemore. Our moderator next week will be Jeff Gianola. So thank you for coming today, and we'll see you next week.